Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's Conversations at Home program. I'm Jenelle Riley from Variety. Before we're joined by our guest today, I want to let you know that the SAG-AFTRA Foundation is a nonprofit organization that relies entirely on donations to provide emergency assistance and free educational programs to SAG-AFTRA artists. This conversation today is made possible thanks to the generosity of our supporters. Over the past year, the foundation has given over $6.5 million in COVID relief to more than 7,000 performers. So if you are a SAG-AFTRA artist and you need help, please ask. And if you can't help, please give. Information can be found in the description of this video. Thank you for your support. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's guest, Tim Blake Nelson. Thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure.
This is an audience of your fellow SAG-AFTRA actors. So I actually always like to start by asking, how did you get your SAG card?
I got my SAG card doing Nora Ephron's first film, which was This Is My Life. And I went and met her at the Beverly Hills Hotel and sat down with her and the casting director, Laura Rosenthal, who was working for Juliet Taylor. And we talked for about half an hour. And she said, well, I want you to be in my movie. I didn't even have to read. For the next 10 years, as I auditioned for everything and anything in the slog that we all face as actors, it wasn't ever like that again. But it was a pretty pleasant way to get my SAG card.
So did you think movies are going to be easy? I just meet with the director and she gives me a part?
More than that, it wasn't just any director. It was Nora Ephron, whom I already admired as a journalist. So, yes, I thought, wow, this is going to be all right. And then I got my rude awakening soon after, with a succession of rejections.
Well, things worked out okay, though, I'd say.
Yeah, they worked out.
I actually want to go back to the beginning because, in addition to being a fantastic actor, you're a writer, director, producer. I believe you're even an editor on some of your films.
Yeah.
So when did you first sort of discover your love of writing and acting and just being creative and fall in love with it? Were you, the kid who did high school plays or?
Like most everyone, it really did start with getting to act in junior high and in high school. And in terms of the writing, I used to write, at my high school, we had morning meeting every day, and people would want their events advertised in a fun way rather than just raising their hand and saying, oh, we're having the pep club is having a bake sale on Friday, so please go by the gym during lunch and buy a brownie. They would want skits performed. And so I would write skits tailored to whatever was being announced. And I would perform in them with my friends. And I really enjoyed doing that. And that got me into doing plays in high school. And I just loved, I think that all actors have a similar story. They just loved being up in front of people and inhabiting characters and telling stories, making people laugh, what have you. And that was certainly my experience in high school. But I didn't think of it as a career, really. I wanted to be, funnily enough, I wanted to be a Latin teacher. And
really?
And I went to college and studied classics. But one spring, my mother came up and visited me in Rhode Island, where I was going to college, and said, what are you doing this summer? And I told her I was going to come home and live at home and find some sort of a job to make some money. And she said, well, I'd love to have you home, which was really true because she was recently divorced and she was living alone and wanted the company. But she said, you don't have any kids, you don't have any responsibilities, you're in college, it's the time in your life when you can really do anything and experiment with stuff. You don't even have a girlfriend. So I thank her for reminding me of that. And she said, why don't you liked acting in high school, why don't you get involved with one of these summer theaters? And so through various circumstances, I was able, even late in the day, to get involved with one. And I loved acting. I did a Tom Stoppard play and a Lanford Wilson play and an Noel Coward play. So very, very different writers. I guess even though two were Brits. And I came back for my sophomore year in college and changed course and decided I wanted to pursue acting. I stuck with my classics major, but then when I graduated, I went to graduate school for acting to train in an intensive way. And I did that for 4 years in acting school as a graduate student, and then started my career.
This is so fascinating to me because there's kind of this stereotype of parents don't want their kids to be actors. You know, they worry about their future, and, you know, it's such a tough business, and they try to discourage them from the arts. But she really opened that door for you. Like, you weren't even considering it were it not for her.
That's correct. My mother was one of those rare parents who encouraged a life in the arts. And my wife and I have tried to follow her example with our children.
And I believe you attended Juilliard?
Yes, that's where I met my wife.
Oh, many different people have very different experiences at Juilliard, and I'm really curious what your experience was.
Well, I wouldn't trade it for anything. So if I had it to do over again, would I have gone to Yale or NYU or North Carolina or the Goodman or ACT, any of the other, you know, there are wonderful programs all over the country. No, I would have gone to Juilliard because it was the right place for me for a compendium of reasons. And some of them involved very painful, demeaning experiences, and some of them involved what I'd call unintended successes. But most of all, I learned a lot. It was exactly the program I needed because, at least at the time, it was by far the most conservative of the training programs. It really did concentrate on voice and the body and somewhat the imagination, but more the voice and the body, voice and speech. But also comprehensively in dance and stage combat and singing. I mean, it was a thorough, difficult, very demanding program. And we were there 10 to 12 hours a day when you included rehearsals. And my wife described it as the Catholic Church because of that sort of conservatism. Mm-hmm. But coming to Juilliard as a classics major, so with a very academic background, I needed those sorts of demands, and I got them. And it wasn't a program, though, that entertained a lot of questioning or any hint of sedition. And so whenever I would object or question something, it was not met with, shall we say, enthusiasm. And so I was beaten down a lot there. And when I was there, a certain degree of individualism was discouraged. You were meant to conform. There was a Juilliard way of working. And so, in certain respects, I was shunted to the side by our fourth year when it came to casting, and I didn't get really great roles. But all through Juilliard, because I was already sensing that, I started to write my own material. And to Juilliard's credit, in the fourth year, when I didn't have a lot to do, I went to the administration and I said, look, I'd like to write a full-length play. If you like it, will you put it in the rep with the other 4 plays that we're going to be doing this year? And I'd like to write a decent role for myself in it. And they said, sure, you can write it. And I did. They even gave me a little bit of time off. And I spent several months working on it and came with a first draft. And they said, yeah, we'll put it in the rep. And so it became a part of our 4th year repertory, our showcase.
Wow.
And that started my career as a writer.
That play wasn't Eye of God, was it?
No, that's
Okay.
the second play. The play was called Cyrus. It was workshopped at Seattle Repertory Theater, but it's never been produced.
I mean, because you've had, like I said, so many different careers, do you think that you would have become a playwright had it not been for Juilliard?
No, I think that I became a playwright because of Juilliard.
Wow.
So I credit Juilliard for what they taught me, but also how they taught me to resist and take care of myself. And I think that's what every actor needs to learn to do. I don't care who it is. It can be Matt Damon, the biggest star. I mean, some version of that story obtains with each of us. Because the world isn't looking for more actors. You're entering a profession that frankly isn't hungry for you. You've got to demand your place in it. And when you face rejection, which you inevitably will, you have to figure out your way to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And Juilliard taught me that, and it was a great lesson.
So when you graduated, at this point, what sort of career were you hoping for or were you imagining for as both writer and director? Did you want to do theater, film? Did you want to, you ended up doing everything. Was that the hope?
No, I figured that mostly I would be in theater. And I would write plays if I was going to, and I wanted to do both. But I was convinced without a doubt, and remained convinced through, and really until O Brother, Where Art Thou, that my life was going to be, if I had success as an actor, it was going to happen in theater. Because for 10 years, from 1990 until 2000, when I did O Brother, Where Art Thou, I did a movie every year and did some guest spots on television every year and did commercials. Just like most theater actors in New York. But mostly I was being repudiated. Whenever I would go up for a series regular role in television or a role of any substance in a film, I wasn't getting the role. And I, particularly on television, in those instances where I would go in during the 90s and read for something and then get a look at my image on the monitor, I just looked over and felt, well, this is hopeless. That people don't want to see that face on television. And frankly, I wasn't wrong. This is not, I'm not, it's true. Particularly network television then. That changed because television changed. And so there ended up being a place for me on television. But in the 90s, it just wasn't, that's not what the taste was. It wasn't what they wanted. And I knew that. And when I was going up for movies, I thought, well, I have a better chance because in movies it's on film and there's a taste for something grittier and you need people to look like real people. And so here I have a bit more hope and I could scratch by. I got some interesting roles like, Paul Giamatti and I had, a nice we were a nice duo in Donnie Brasco with Johnny Depp, and I got the role in the Nora Ephron movie, and I was in The Thin Red Line, directed by Terrence Malick. But these were nice little, couple scene character roles, and I was very happy with that. Whereas in theater, I was really getting work off Broadway. I would go in and audition, and I would get the part, and I would usually get called back if I didn't get the part. I would get called back, or I would get the part. And so I figured, yeah, that would be my life. I'd be a New York theater actor and write plays. But luckily, there were these brothers who wanted gargoyles in their movies. And, they cast Turturro and Buscemi and John Polito and people like that in their movies. And I came onto their radar, and they put me in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
How did you sort of come on their radar? I think every actor wants to know, was it through theater, actually?
Kind of. My wife and I volunteered for a good 15 years, and my wife actually eventually joined the board, on which she still now serves, of a place called the 52nd Street Project in New York City. Okay. That works with imperiled kids in the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood by doing theater with them. Not with the goal of creating theater artists, but with the goal of enhancing self-esteem and giving them a place to go and something to do after school. And there's a tutoring program. It's a wonderful and comprehensive after-school program for the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood. And Fran McDormand was on the board at that time. And everybody kept saying, it's so difficult for Fran and Joel to find couples that they like, that kind of match with them both. You guys, we think, actually might be great. Fran would love Lisa, and Joel would really like Tim. And so they kept sort of shoving us together, and finally it happened. It was almost like a matchmaking situation, and we did indeed get along, and I became friends first with Joel and met Ethan through Joel, but really was mainly friends with Joel. And when they were going to make Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, they needed an unknown actor for that part. Because they wanted to do a lot of 3 shots and then singles on George. And they didn't want to deal with actors who would say, well, what about my scene? Why did George get a close up and I didn't? And they knew Turturro would be fine with that because they knew John. And John was a regular player with them, and he knew that sometimes it's his turn and sometimes it's somebody else's. And they said, let's play it safe and put an unknown in the role of Delmar. And Joel said, well, man, Tim would be good in that role. And so he called me and offered me the part.
Again, you didn't have to audition for this amazing breakthrough role.
No.
That's incredible. But also, you were a classics guy, and Oh Brother is a very loose adaptation of Homer's The Odyssey. It was probably nice to have you on set as a bit of a consultant. They
never consulted me once. But funnily enough, I thought when Joel sent me the script, he didn't offer it to me. He just sent it and said, I need your advice. And I thought he wanted to talk about the adaptation. And then I called him back and he said, will you play Delmar?
Wow. I mean, did that change your life and career?
It did. It did change my life and career. And I certainly never forget it. But I'm most grateful that it didn't happen for me early, that I graduated from college, spent 4 years having the shit kicked out of me in grad school, and then 10 years, in spite of the getting cast by Nora Ephron in effectively my first film audition. It wasn't easy for 10, I was a struggling actor. I was rejected a lot for 10 years, and scraped by, and I'm grateful for that decade, because when No Brother did come along, I really, really appreciated it. Yeah.
It seemed like, and again, this is all perception. You actually lived it. You tell me if this is accurate. It seemed like as a writer, you were doing pretty well out of the gate. I mean, you had Eye of God and The Gray Zone, obviously. Did you have representation as a writer?
I did get representation as a writer right out of Juilliard, because a wonderful casting director in New York named Alexa Fogel, who's also a friend and got such a great eye for actors, saw my play, and she said, "Look, I know a writing agent, and I'd like to give him your play." And there was nothing in it for Alexa. She just did it out of just decency and generosity. It wasn't like she was going to get a casting job out of it. And so this guy, Jack Cantliff, wonderful agent, read the play and signed me on. And he and his partner, a guy who's since died of AIDS, actually, John Santoyani, started representing me, and they got my first play, actually that play which had been done at Juilliard, they got a workshop for me at Seattle Repertory Theater. And then my second play was produced by Seattle Rep with Doug Hughes directing, and he's the guy who's directed all my plays since.
I mean, people talk about range as actors, but I remember you were writing plays like Eye of God and The Gray Zone, which are obviously very dramatic works. Whereas an actor, I knew you for sketch comedy with The Unnatural. And I don't know if you were doing The Unnaturals to sort of blow off the steam from doing so much drama as a writer, or it was just, you were just showing your range.
Well, I was also writing on The Unnatural. I came to The Unnaturals, which is this wonderful sketch comedy show that had a short life, but a good life. And it had Siobhan Fallon on it, and also Paul Feig, who's turned out to be a wonderful comedy director. And I came on as a guest star, and then was invited to remain and to be on the writing staff. And so I was writing for that show as well. I want to say, however, that I was just doing any work I could get. So I was grateful to be on The Unnaturals. It was a great time, and Siobhan Fallon and I remained close friends. And I learned a lot from her. And she ended up being on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
But I was just taking any job I could get, and I was lucky enough to get that one. So there was no design to it, I guess is what I was saying.
What about as an actor? How were you able to land representation?
While I was at Juilliard, agents come into Juilliard starting in the third year, when the public is allowed to see us. And I was in a class with two actors named Gene Triplehorn and Jake Weber. And they were represented at Abrams Artists at the time. And their agents came to see our third year Shaw play. We were doing Heartbreak House. And they asked me to sign with them.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
so I had an agent in my third year, and then that was all ready for me when I got out, which was, it sounds like I've lived this. I don't take any of it for granted, but that's how that happened.
I mean, we've joked that, you didn't have to audition for Nora Ephron or the Coen brothers, but you said that you did do many, many, many other auditions. How are you at auditioning? It's such a specific skill.
I was very good at it in theater. Because it's you in the room and the director in the room, and the director works with you, and what the director encounters is very close to a version of what you might bring to the role, but also the rehearsal process. It's a reliable sketch of what might happen. An audition on camera, particularly back then, was not so much like that, particularly for actors like me coming out of Juilliard who had no idea how to work on camera. That has since changed because at the graduate schools, they teach on camera now. They didn't back then. In fact, it was anathema. And they would say to us, we're not training you to be film and television actors. We're training you to be theater actors. So if you want to go do film and television, all power to you. But we're about theater. That's it. We're training you to be repertory theater actors. It was very conservative in that respect. Also now, we're around the iPhone and cameras so much, or the younger actors are, that we're just used to, people are just used to, they're aware of what they look like on camera in ways that we weren't back then. And so I would go into auditions and just be terrible and completely fall on my face. I mean, just awful, embarrassing. And never went to network on anything, was rarely called back for anything. And the directors who would cast me were usually people with whom I could have a conversation, and I could do a kind of end around my bad camera work. So Mike Newell cast Paul Giamatti and me in Donnie Brasco, and I'm pretty sure this was the case with Paul. Not because of our audition, but because of a conversation. It was the encountering the guy in the room, and of course that makes sense because Mike Newell came out of joint stock. He was a theater guy. Mm-hmm. Nora, the same way. She was a journalist and then a screenwriter directing her first movie. She wasn't really interested in putting me on tape. She didn't even know what the role was. We just talked about the movie in general. And then she said, well, clapped her hands. I want you to be in this movie and we're going to find a place for you. When I would audition, I was awful. And not what you'd want in your movie. I don't blame anybody. I remember meeting the guy, Rennie Harlan, the director, Rennie Harlan, at his absolute apogee. I mean, he was the action director. And it was for a 2-line part. And maybe there were 15 of us who auditioned for that role in New York, I'm guessing. And he just looked at me like, what, I botched even that. And he said, well, that is, can't remember what the character's name was. Boxer, I think. And he said, well, that is Boxer. And it was just derisive. I don't think he meant to be derisive. I'm sure he's a perfectly nice man. But it was just humiliation after humiliation until I sorted my shit out and started to learn through the doing of it how to be on camera. I would watch myself in a movie if I got a part and just think, oh, that didn't work, or that worked, and here's why. And I feel like I'm still in the process of learning that.
I mean, before we really got to know you as an actor, you had already directed at least one feature film. In 1997, you adapted your play Eye of God into a feature. So it seems like you were doing pretty well as a director, and you must know, I know you're on the other side, but you had some experience with what actors looked like on camera and working with the camera yourself. Did you find that helped you at all?
It did, but it still took me another, I would say, decade. And Oh Brother was a different kind of thing, but it took me another decade at least to learn how little you have to do. And really to appreciate the intimacy of work on film. Oh Brother was different because the Coens harken back to a film acting aesthetic that's rooted in Preston Sturges and other filmmakers from really the pre-war era. And they want a theatricality that usually isn't, it's not only not required, but it's unwelcome in film acting. And so Oh Brother was in a sense, although it was great for their movie, in a sense there was an aspect of it which was problematic because it encouraged some of the bad habits I needed to get rid of for better film acting. And the great thing about a career as an actor, and I hope anybody watching this will completely agree and experiences this as well, is that you keep refining your process. You keep learning how to do it. And also each movie has its own aesthetic terms in which you need to operate. And it's about bringing yourself to that and servicing the greater whole rather than bringing your shtick. Even when they want your shtick, you're still subordinating yourself to a greater vision. And that can be a very exciting process for an actor, particularly, as you get on in your career and you can look at each new role as a new and specific challenge.
I know it's so hard to predict like what is going to work, what's not going to work. So many things are out of your control, but I'm so curious if you've gotten good at like developing a sense for when something is working. I'm thinking about something like Watchmen, which, it's a miracle in some ways that it was as fantastic as it was on the page. I don't know if that works, or maybe it did. Maybe the scripts were just so fantastic, but when, you're stepping into a universe that someone's created, there's probably been times when you were, disappointed with the final product, and maybe sometimes when you were pleasantly surprised.
Well, I knew Damon was going to shepherd something remarkable, and I loved the pilot script. I then met Nikki Kassal, the director, and she only inspired more confidence. She was an art history major in college, and talking to her about 19th century art was not only thrilling, but it just underscored that I was going to be in the hands of a real, a rigorous and serious person who was going to bring a sense of the history of composition to the look of the thing. And so I was really confident about Watchmen. What I wasn't so sure about was what my character was going to be, and that's of course the vulnerability of anybody acting in television when it's not a limited series. And Watchmen originally was not a limited series. It became one, but it was originally just, this is a series that HBO is going to do. And we only had the pilot. And Damon was of the mind that you keep actors innocent of their futures so that they don't infect the present with choices that are going to either tilt that narrative hand of the project. So you don't want to play the ending because that's not good for the story. And also he's of a mind, and many people are like that. Woody Allen applied this approach, that we don't know what's going to happen in our lives. And so isn't it better for the actor to experience that too? This is all to say I had no idea that Wade Tillman was going to have any sort of presence in the show at all.
Really?
In fact, there was a moment when Damon retracted the offer from me and said, look, I don't think this is going to be enough for you. And I don't want to feel like I'm wasting your time when you could be going and doing other projects. And then he called a day later and said, actually, I've changed my mind. I have some ideas. You're going to have a lot to do. Just trust me. So will you sign on? And I did, but I didn't know what that was going to mean or be. And
correct me if I'm wrong, I think some things changed, like as you were shooting.
They did. Actually, the backstory of my character changed completely. There was going to be this big revelation about why my character was a policeman at all. And I was told that, the original idea, when I met with Nikki and was considering playing the role. And I was really excited about that piece of backstory. And then suddenly Damon said, no, that's not true anymore. I've got something else in mind. And what he came up with was even better.
It's pretty awesome. I mean, maybe an apocalyptic event isn't awesome, but for the character, it was awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, so like it was a leap of faith that paid off. I mean, do you find in general you have pretty good instincts, or sometimes you don't know, you're flying blind?
I've made some mistakes. I don't regret any of the roles I've taken, because with each one, even when I've fallen on my face, I feel like I've gotten better.
Mm.
So I'll look at something and say, you did not serve them, Tim. What were you thinking? You pushed an idea too far instead of just being inside the role. It's that performance is so conceptual and overperformed and overdone. I felt that way. But the regret is always for having failed the project. I'm simultaneously, as painful as it's been, I've always simultaneously been grateful for the lessons I've learned. There's one character in which I chewed gum. And I made the choice because I was going to do a sequel, and the character was going to transform in that sequel. And so I said, okay, I want to chew gum because in the sequel, he's going to be very an orally fixated character, let's just say. And then I watched the movie, and they never made the sequel because the movie didn't work. But I watched the movie, and it was all about the fucking gum chewing.
Mm.
And I just felt terrible every time I would come on screen chewing gum. But I wanted to call the director and just say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I just played that idea so much. A lot of the other stuff I did in the role, I thought, okay, this worked, that worked. But I had marred it with this. It was an idea. It wasn't the character. And so you learn,
Mm-hmm.
and you move on and try to get better.
What was it, Lincoln?
No, it wasn't Lincoln. Yeah, the sequel of Lincoln.
Just trying to imagine a sequel to that.
Yeah.
I mean, you have played so many roles. You've managed to never really be typecast. You know, you've done comedy, you've done drama, you've even done musicals. In general, how do you sort of choose your roles?
At this point, there are three criteria. It has to be irresistible. The project has to be irresistible. So I have to say, I want to be a part of that filmmaker's pursuit of this story. That I have to do. Then I have to feel like I can do the role and they couldn't find somebody better. Maybe they can find somebody different and every bit as interesting, but I'm not going to feel like they should have cast somebody else, which is another way of saying I want to know that I'll bring something to the role, that I'm not going to fail. And then finally, I have to feel like the director is going to get the resources and the support he needs or she needs to realize his or her vision. And those are pretty high hurdles. And it has to be all three. And then I'm probably going to be interested in it. It doesn't ultimately matter whether it's a lead role or a supporting role. Because if the second criterion is reached, which is to say, I'm the right person for the role, sometimes that's a small role.
I mean, you've also worked with so many amazing directors, from the Coens to Ang Lee to Steven Spielberg. As a director yourself, what have you learned from them? And as an actor, what do you like in a director?
I like a director who knows what he or she wants and who's unafraid to get it and just completely unintimidated. And not just by me, but by anybody on the set. I like a director who has real authorship on the set. And that doesn't mean a tyrant. And it doesn't mean a person who's closed to the opinions of others. It means somebody who actually has a benign but ruthless confidence in how and why they're telling the story. And will get out of everyone, regardless of their job on the set, what he or she needs. In terms of what I've learned, every time I'm on a set, whether it's a first timer or one of the greats who's been doing it for decades, I always learn something. That on the movie that's coming out very soon called Old Henry, there's a gunfight at the close of the film between Stephen Dorff and me. And the director had 3 hours to shoot it.
Wow.
And it's a long gunfight, very involved, with the responsibility of needing to be the culminating action scene of the movie. And pretty much with an adroitness I've rarely encountered in a director. He came in and he didn't shoot a master shot. And he just put Dorff and me through our paces and got every piece he needed comprehensively in 3 hours while the daylight was going down and he was losing Stephen Dorff the next day. So there was no way around it. He had to shoot this in 3 hours. But because he was organized and confident and ruthless in his pursuit and never rude to anyone while doing it, he got that scene, and it really works. And it was just a blessing to be around that. And at the age of 57, I guess I was 56 when we shot it, but to get to do that, I just, I felt there's no way, there's no place I'd rather be than on this very young filmmaker's set. It's his second movie.
Wow. We actually obviously have to talk about Old Henry. This is a period Western in which you play a widowed farmer raising his son. I don't know if I've ever seen a movie where you're pretty much in every scene. You're first on the call sheet. It's the titular role. Well, you've played Buster Scruggs, obviously, but that was a very different kind of cowboy. Oh, how did the role find its way to you, and what attracted you? It's obvious when you see the movie, you know, Henry is a great role, but you're signing on for a whole project. And like you said, only a second-time filmmaker.
Well, I was surprised they wanted me to play the role. I was cooking dinner and I got an email. They want you, you've been offered the role of Henry in a movie called Old Henry. When I'm offered the title role, I know it's going to be an indie. So that I knew immediately. And I thought, well, I have a son named Henry. That's kind of fun. And it's old. First time I've been offered a role, as you know, where the character is described as a codger. So I read it, and the more I read, because there's a surprise that happens in the movie, the more demanding the role became, and the more of a challenge it felt like it would be. And so, honestly, I had to give it a think, because there's that second issue I just mentioned, which is, do I feel like I'm going to bring something to this role that will, am I going to satisfy what the filmmaker wants? Am I going to pull it off? And that wasn't immediately clear to me, because I'm not a gunslinger. And ultimately that's what this guy is. So, and Buster Scruggs, yes, I'd done that, but he's a very performative, wink at the camera kind of character, and this is the opposite of that. But what ultimately drew me in and made the film irresistible was the story of a father and a son, and the tug of war inside of my character, the character of Henry, between wanting to protect his son from the violence and tragedies of the world and wanting to expose him to the violence and tragedies of the world so that he might be able to encounter and endure and finally prevail over them as an adult. And those are familiar forces in my own life, because I'm a dad and I have 3 sons, and I struggle with that every day. Do I protect them or let them go out there and experience how shitty the world can sometimes be? And that's the tender heart of this movie, even though it's a violent meat and potatoes Western thriller.
I mean, and also is Henry helping his son by sheltering him? Because at some point or another, that kid's going to have to pick up a gun. And the son, Wyatt, is played by this wonderful actor, Gavin Lewis, I believe is his name.
Yeah.
He is so fantastic. And so much of the movie hinges on really the relationship between you two. And I just always think it's strange when you put 2 people together and say, you've known each other your whole lives. Now go. Of course, they are a little, it's a contentious relationship, so maybe that helped. But how did you sort of develop that chemistry?
Well, it was very easy with Gavin because he's a sweet, innocent kid. And I think he has lived, even though he's a professional actor. I got to know his mom a bit, as well as Gavin. And I think he's lived a pretty sheltered existence. And so there was great raw material there in terms of how he was sourcing his own life in playing that character. And then I had the added bonus of my oldest son, Henry. Yes, named Henry.
I was just going to wait, Henry?
Being on set as the on-set dresser in the art department.
Oh, wow.
And so he was there every day. And we're very close. And so I was constantly reminded of fatherhood and what specifically it is and what inherently it is. And inherently was the more important word there, because I was obviously trying to make the relationship with Gavin true. And that had to be inside of me, and there my son was, and I'm his father on set, in addition to the interacting with my son in the movie, and it was a great help.
Hmm. Was this the first movie you did, post-pandemic?
No.
Oh, okay.
I've done, I think 4 during the pandemic. Plus
Oh, wow.
I've done an animated series, a series called Lost Ollie with Peter Ramsey in the pandemic too, which is interesting to do an animated series on computer from my own home via Zoom. So I've never met the director in person.
Oh, wow.
And it's an involved series, and we've done, spent a lot of time. Peter Ramsey, this is a very exacting director in a great way. And so it's been tens of hours working on it. And then I did this little movie called Ghost of the Ozarks, and then Nightmare Alley, which is coming out later this year.
Yeah.
And a movie called National Champions, which is also coming out later this year. So I've experienced the gamut of COVID protocols, from the most lax to the most severe.
Well, I remember talking to you and Gene Smart, and I feel like you were one of the first people. You were about to go do a movie, and you were like one of the first people I heard going to a set during.
I think that movie Ghost of the Ozarks was, I believe it was the first one. That's what the SAG rep told us when he came to visit.
Yeah, you were the first person I heard even talking about going back to set.
Yeah, and I was eager to do that, and I tried to get a lot of my friends to join on. I finally did get David Aaron Baker to do it. But
your fellow Juilliard classmate.
Yeah. You know everything. Great.
No, I just know Group 19. You were part of Group 19.
Right. Yeah. But a lot of actors, and perfectly fair, said, no, I'm not ready to go yet. Not going to do that. But I wanted to get out there and work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people were eager and were felt surprisingly safe once they did get there.
Yeah, and on one of the movies, actually, Old Henry, we had, there were concentric zones, and I think so. The inner circle was the set. I think in the next zone outside of that, there was a guy got COVID.
Oof.
And we didn't have to shut down, but our shoot was delayed because the week before somebody in the inner circle got COVID and had to be replaced. It was a camera operator, I believe. And a makeup artist. And
wow.
So it was delayed a week.
Wow. I invoked Buster Scruggs earlier. He's on my mind a lot because I keep seeing that GIF of you hitting the table with your foot.
Oh, is that right?
The guy yeah, it keeps, for some weird reason, it keeps popping up in my feed as of late. I always wondered if that was done practically.
It was.
Oh my God. How many?
Joel and Ethan they're analog filmmakers. They like it old fashioned.
Yeah.
And so, Jeff Concher, the production designer, yeah, he and on-set effects and the prop department came up with that table, and I had never been so glad that I do yoga because I had to get my foot up high enough and do it without any support. And I started yoga because I did this movie several years ago called, actually it was right before Buster Scruggs, called Don Quixote, The True Don Quixote. And I had to do a naked headstand in that movie. And so I said, how do I do that? And somebody said, well, you've got to do yoga. And my wife has been trying to get me to do yoga for decades. And so I did, and it's amazing. And it's really, really good for me as an actor and as a person. And a side benefit was that suddenly I was able to pull off that stunt and get my leg up high enough and hit that table accurately.
I mean, how many times did you have to do that?
Once.
Really? Just
yeah,
once?
Got it in one take.
Wow. Well, the reason I also
That's not just about me. I mean, it's about everybody else, because it's not just the actor who has to get everything right in a take. It's the cameraman and, and the other actors. And so, Clancy Brown was involved too. And everybody else, because Clancy Brown.
The reason I did invoke Buster Scruggs, though, is he's a very different kind of cowboy, but I know that you spend a lot of time, working with guns. Obviously, you're riding horses. And it makes me wonder if, the prep that you do for one film can often help you with another character. I mean, you just talked about doing yoga and how that helped with Buster Scruggs.
Buster Scruggs certainly helped with playing Old Henry because I had such a head start with the gun work. That said, they're completely different characters and they have completely different relationships to the gun. So that Buster Scruggs is histrionic and wants to share everything with you. As Ethan would tell me on set, the guy doesn't shut up. And Henry feels that any information divulged about him is going to result in vulnerability. And so he's all about concealment and restraint. So they're completely different characters, and their relationship to the gun is completely different. Henry is not interested in flourishes. He's interested in utility. Use the gun minimally, just how it's needed to get the job done, and save your bullets. So while they're completely different characters, yes, the work with the gun for Buster Scruggs made being comfortable with it as simply a tool with which the character is absolutely expert far easier on Old Henry.
How else did you go about preparing to play this character? Because I don't want to give any spoilers away, but he is so complex. There's so much going on. There's also the physical work of he's, running this farm. Where did you even begin?
I had about a year prep. And so it started with research and working on the script with Potsy. And to be clear, it's Potsy's script. He's the writer-director. I was not, I'm not claiming any authorship. This was a movie written and directed by Potsy Ponceroli. But it was a role that needed collaboration between the writer-director and his lead actor. And so we went about that in a very meticulous way with a lot of research. And the character I play in the movie is not just a fictional character, and there's source material about him, and there's a lot of it out there. And I immersed myself in that and was able to work with Potsy to get a lot of that man's vocabulary into the movie. And his rhythm of speech and just certain stuff I read about him and the way that he, what his relationship was with the gun, what his first acts of violence were, how he smiled, when he smiled, what sort of a friend he was, what loyalty meant to him. And having a lot of time to allow that to seep in was an enormous luxury. And then about, I'd say 4 months out, I really started learning the part, because at this stage, I try to show up on set knowing an entire role so that I can literally arrive any day and they can say, we're shooting scene 53, and I'll be ready to shoot it no matter what the scene is. And I found that that allows for me just to be worrying on the shoot day only about the stuff that needs to be worried about on the shoot day. I don't want to worry about my lines. I don't want to worry about where I am in the story. I don't want to worry about how I interact with a certain prop. I want all of that to be second nature, so that really what I'm doing is interacting with my scene partner and giving the director what he wants. And that's it. That I'm really living in the experience while the camera is rolling as much as I can. And with all this prep time, I was really able to do that with this part. And then finally, I got down there almost a month early.
Wow.
And was, well, I had the luxury of an added week because we were delayed from COVID. So it was about 2.5 weeks early, and then that turned into 3.5 weeks. And so I was working every day with the guns and the horses and all that stuff, and cutting up a carcass and tying ropes and, you know, all the stuff that he has to do in the movie. So that, again, it was there for me and I didn't have to worry about it.
I mean, was it challenging? You're, you know, in addition to all the COVID protocols, he's an isolated character. It looks like you're shooting in the middle of nowhere. It's a very tense story. Are you the kind of actor who, you know, sort of takes your characters home with you?
No, not so much. And, you know, I had my son with me and we were staying across the hall from each other in a hotel, and I wanted to be able to enjoy that. And one of the luxuries of doing a huge amount of prep is that you can say, I have this. I've been working for months on this. So I'll go over my lines. I'll review where I am and what I need and, you know, the basic acting stuff. But now I can also have dinner and hang out and practice with the pistol and maybe play a little guitar and shoot the shit with my son. And so that's what I did. I you know, I didn't want to bring it back to the hotel with me because, frankly, I get fatigued when I try to do that. And I've been around Daniel Day-Lewis, who does that. And he doesn't. So that's the way he needs to work. I'd love to say I can do that and to be able to hold forth about the supremacy of my great artistic technique the way that Daniel justifiably can. And he's just a great guy and all power to him. You know, he's a wonderful man in addition to being as talented as a film actor as has ever acted on screen. But I've learned that my approach needs to be different than that.
So you've actually met Daniel Day-Lewis, because I know people who have worked with him who say, I've never met him. I met the character he was playing.
Yeah, I got to know him during the press for Lincoln. So I never met him on set as anyone but Lincoln.
Wow.
But then when we would do press, we did a lot of different press together, and I got to know him a bit then.
Wow.
And he's just an incredibly gracious, unpretentious, humble man. And I'll also say that his process doesn't encumber a shoot, it adds to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it causes everybody to be more disciplined, more rigorous, more focused, and to be on point. And that's not just the actors, but the entire crew.
You mentioned that you had a lot of time to prepare for Old Henry, but at the same time, when you say you had, months to a year of prep, you're doing like 5 movies a year. So are you multitasking? Are you prepping for several characters? How do you do that? I can only concentrate on one thing at a time, and barely that.
Hey, I'm sure that's not true.
It's true.
About you.
True.
With your encyclopedic knowledge of every actor and every movie played.
No, just you.
Yeah, right. David Baker, Route 19. But no, I work a long day and I'm not on social media.
No, don't tell me that's the answer. I can't get off social media.
Well, you can't. I mean, I don't. My life doesn't depend on it.
Yeah.
And it's just a decision I made, and it's to my detriment because now that's a metric. And so even on Old Henry, they would like for me to be on social media and to have whatever following I would have. I don't know what that would be. And I always say no because I would obsess over it. And it would, anything attributed to my name, I would pore over it. And I have other stuff I need to be doing.
I think you're making the right choice. You're absolutely making the right choice because it is an addiction. So when I tell you that there's lots of gifts of you out there, you know what that means, right?
I do because I have children.
I figured.
I've heard of the one that you're adducing, but I've heard that there's one of "Come on in, boys, the water's fine," and one of "Go for Everett." But I hadn't heard of that other one.
Oh, it's very popular.
All right.
Very popular. It works for pretty much any situation.
Okay.
So it might be the movie we're talking about right now, Old Henry, but I'm curious, what has been your most challenging role?
There are a couple in theater that were really challenging. Thersites and Troilus and Cressida in this wild production directed by my mentor, Mark Wing Davey. Another one would be this play called The Beard of Avon, directed by Doug Hughes, that was done at New York Theater Workshop about 10 years ago. On film, Old Henry was one. Weirdly, Watchmen was another because I was trying to do as little as possible. And I've done so many roles in which I was either doing a lot or too much. And so that restraint was sometimes a challenge. Buster Scruggs took a huge amount of prep with learning the pistol tricks, and I also learned to play the guitar for that movie.
Wait, you didn't play the guitar before then?
No.
And now you're just collecting them.
Well, I play. I don't just collect them, I play very badly. And I'm still learning because I love it. And I also feel like it's good for my brain to learn something new at this age. And my son is the guy who teaches me, and that's really fun. My oldest son, Henry, is a guitar player, and he's my teacher, and that's really rewarding. But no, I didn't play before that movie, and I had to learn well enough to play and sing while riding a horse. So that was a lot of work. But it's all fun. None of this is complaint. And again, this is for actors. I'm sure everybody agrees with me. You want to be doing that stuff. That's why we do this. And so I guess in light of that, so many of the roles have been challenging, and I'm thankful for that.
I actually was curious about the last time you were on stage. I know you did a play in 2019. You did Socrates. But when were you last on stage as an actor?
Oh, I think that was A Midsummer Night's Dream in Central Park. I played Peter Quince in a production by Dan Sullivan.
Oh.
And I think that must have been 2011 or 2012, something like that. Just the right part hasn't come along. There's a cost for me doing theater, which is that I'm at home, but I'm away at night. And that's when my children are home. And so I really have to feel like I've got to do the role. And luckily, A Midsummer Night's Dream was happening during the summer. And so it wasn't like I was missing out on my kids because they were around during the day.
Mm-hmm. What is it that you love about the medium of theater that you don't get from, any other medium?
That it's different every night and you don't have another take. And so to be on point that way is thrilling. There's the other stuff too, which is of course the relationship with the audience, the fact that you're taking part in a medium that is more than 2,000 years old, 2,500 years old at least. That it's truly a collective enterprise that includes the audience in that in a way that film doesn't. All that's pretty thrilling, and it makes you better as an actor in a way that working on film doesn't.
I mean, something I've noticed about a lot of your roles and your projects on film and TV is these great ensembles. You tend to be a part of just these amazing, flawless ensembles. And I don't know if that's, again, an active choice you're making, if it's something you're drawn to, maybe from your theater background. You mentioned earlier that you'll take any role if it speaks to you. It doesn't have to be the lead, but, is there something about, getting to work with all these amazing other actors and maybe, not having it all rest on your shoulders?
Often I'm the first or second person cast in a movie.
Really?
For whatever reason. I'm not sure why that has happened. And so I credit the directors with those ensembles, not any choice on my part. I wish I could say that that's what it is. But I'm a type of actor, I believe, who it's a self-selective process. Because if you want me in a movie, it's probably not going to have a completely mainstream sensibility. And so if the casting has any coherence to it, you're going to get other actors like that.
Makes sense.
I remember Eric Bogosian said to me once, well, what I am is I'm a pointer. So if I'm in a movie, then other actors, when they're offered the part, will say, oh, well, Eric's doing it. It must be kind of weird and maybe interesting. And I think that's true about a lot of character actors, and perhaps I'm one of those.
And what's up next for you? Because I know you're in Guillermo del Toro's new movie. Actually, I think you're in his next two movies if I'm not mistaken.
Three projects with Guillermo.
You line them all up in a row.
There's Nightmare Alley, and then I did. I'm doing Pinocchio with him, which is as a voice. That's an animated feature, and I get to sing in that, which is really fun. And then his Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities horror series for Netflix. I just finished 3 weeks ago. I just finished shooting that with this wonderful director named Guillermo Navarro, who was the DP on Chronos, Devil's Backbone, Pan's Labyrinth, and Pacific Rim. So a longtime collaborator of Guillermo's. And Guillermo wrote the script and produced it. So that'll be coming out probably in the spring of next year. I'm not sure.
Oh. So he's really hitched his star to you.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. It's not the other way around. I believe my next movie is a film with a Canadian writer-director named Andrew Curry. I did a film of his years ago called Fido, which is a culty zombie movie that I recommend to anyone. It's a really fun, interesting movie. And in this film that Andrew wrote and will direct, Lucy Liu and I play a husband and wife who lost a child. Mm. And she's moving through her grief in a healthy way, and my character really isn't. And I slip in as a result into this alternate universe and have to fight my way out of that universe and through my grief. And it's a very interesting philosophical piece about grief, almost a meditation on grief, and a quite beautiful film that we probably will be making in January, I think now.
Sounds amazing. I'm super excited for Nightmare Alley because I read the book when I was a kid, and obviously I've seen the original. I even saw a musical they did of Nightmare Alley. Yeah, didn't totally work, but I think that had more to do with it was only a cast of 6 people, trying to be this big carnival and.
Well, this is a very big cast. And speaking to my statement earlier that if it's irresistible, I'll play any size part. Let's say that I'm not the lead of this movie. It's a nice part, an integral part, but very much not a large role.
I mean,
but thrilling. I mean, the movie I haven't seen it, but I've seen sections of it, and I know it's going to be extraordinary.
Literally everyone is in this movie. I think I'm in this movie.
You are. I thought you did wonderful work.
Thank you. If you'd ever actually seen me act, you would know that is not true. What about as a director? Are you eager to get behind the camera again?
Yeah, I have. My God, 4 of my scripts I'd like to make. I don't know which is going to be next. And there are some collaborations that I'm working on with my oldest son, the one who was in the art department on Old Henry. And I'm not quite sure what's going to be next, either something with him or one of my own pieces. But I think that within the next year, I'll be directing something. I'm just not sure which one it'll be.
Fantastic. Well, I can't wait to see what you do next. I won't have to wait long because Old Henry will actually be available, I believe, on October 1st. I mean, I've seen it, but for all of you watching at home, you should check it out. I want to thank you so much for being here today and for talking to your fellow artists.
Well, I'm grateful.